Hello, my name's Gary Burgess and I'm the head of officiating here at England Netball, and I'll be taking you through this presentation on the 2024 Rules of Netball update. Now, the outcomes of this session are to provide you, the netball family, with a grassroots level update on the 2024 rules of the game. Now, there'll always also be a section introducing the process for submitting and reviewing responses to rules questions, and you'll be able to see those on our FAQ document. And as a reminder, as it's shown on the screen there, and also in the comments for this video, all up-to-date information, including videos from World Netball and any press releases, etc., related to the new rules, can be found on the England Netball website. So just pop in a Google search, officiating, rules and updates, and that will take you to that page. Now, throughout this presentation, we would always ask that all rules and updates are to be read in conjunction with the England Netball rules domestic guidance, because they often provide you a lot more context with regards to the leeway, let's say, that's allowed for grassroots netball, remembering that the rules of the game are written for international competition. So it's well worth having a look at that. Now, throughout this presentation, you will notice that in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, there is a rules book icon, and where that appears, you will be given the rules heading and or the subheading and the page number so that you can follow that or turn to that page in your rules book. Now, different to the webinars, this is an opportunity for you to press stop, start, rewind, and to have a look and have a read of your rule book throughout. And also, as mentioned, if you need any additional context, you can always turn to the World Netball videos that can be found on our rules and updates page for additional context and visual examples of the rules in action. Okay, so what has actually changed? So the first thing you'll notice is that the rule book's changed, not just the cover, but a lot of it's been reordered and been put into more plain English to make it easily to translate across our netball world. There have been updates to the contact rule and also to the game management rules, and there have been a few tweaks to scoring a goal. There's been the introduction of a tactical change, and unfortunately, the news is true, the toss-up has been removed. Now, there are other additional changes that have been introduced to speed up the playing of the game, all of which we'll talk about in the next few slides. So, how does it actually look? Within the rules book, there have been definitions at the front that have been included to support understanding. So if you have a quick flick through, there will be a number of those which actually expand on individual rules. Now, within the rules book, principles have been added, including advantage, the centre pass, and game management. Now, these are primarily for umpires, but they are provide additional context in how the rule should be applied. So what it's intended, of how it's been intended to be applied. But they're well worth reading by anyone who's looking for extra information on the rules. Now, each rule now has an attached sanction or action, and this can be seen in blue text. Now, this was introduced to aid consistent application across our umpiring world and consistent delivery by umpires, essentially aiding players and coaches understanding at the same time. Now, what to say, there has been terminology added also in green italics. So this is again introduced to aid consistent application and make sure everyone is saying the same thing when delivering sanctions or actions. Now, the old match guidelines have been added or incorporated into the rule book. So those of you that are students of the rules, you remember there was a section at the back. Now, this has actually been added into the main rules so that the rules form the single point of information on how the game should be played. Now, as it says at the bottom there, rule books are now available from the England Netball store, and the link is in the comments for this video, but they may also be available from your county officiating lead. So it's always good to check if these are available locally. It saves on the postage and packaging costs. So straight into the new rules. Now, there have been a number of changes to both the team members' failure to take the court rule and late players rule. Now, essentially, the reason that these next three slides are important is because the delivery of failure to take the court and late players was always a little bit complicated in the previous rules. So, the ball was advanced and a captain was cautioned and somebody else had to stand out of play. And to remember all of that was a really hard job. Okay, so this rule has been streamlined into team members, failure to take the court, and late players. Now, the team members rule deals with the fact that a minimum of 5 players and a maximum of 7 players may or must be on court at any time. Okay, one of whom must play centre. Now, this rule talks about what happens if there isn't enough, and also what happens if there are too many. So if a team does not have 5 players available at any time, the umpires will award the match to the opposing team. Simple. You've not got enough players to play, you can't play. Now, if at any point you find that there are too many players on the court, so more than 7, this rule now covers what happens if, and that player is just sent from the court, play is stopped, and the umpire must remember where the ball was when play was stopped, and that player is sent from the court. Okay, so that's basically a really simple update in that area. Now, this links quite nicely on to failure to take the court. So as I said, this has been streamlined. Now, failure to take the court is concerned about players returning to court once the game has started. Okay, so once the game has started, failure to take the court is the rule to cover all of this area. Now, if a team does not have 5 players present at the start of a period of play, as mentioned, the umpires will wait for 30 seconds for additional players to arrive. Now, if they don't arrive, the game is awarded to the non-infringing team. But if they do arrive, then the whistle will be blown to start play. It will be immediately blown again, and then the team will be penalised for delaying play. So there's no captains standing out. Okay, but the centre pass will be advanced from the centre circle to inside the centre third up to the transverse line. If it's the infringing team's centre pass, they will lose that centre pass and the opposition will have that, and then that is advanced to the transverse line within the centre pass, within the centre third. Okay, so that deals with failure to take the court at the beginning of an interval once the game started, or perhaps after a stoppage. Okay, now what happens at the beginning of a game? Now, any late player, and this often happens at grassroots level, people can't find a parking space or something like that. Any late player may, after advising the umpire, take to court in the vacant positions at the next break of play. Okay, now as I talked about in the introduction, a breaking play is in the definitions, and this is after a goal is scored, during a stoppage or interval, or when a sanction is awarded. Now, if it's the first time that you've seen the player, umpires have to take a little bit longer to check nails and jewellery and that sort of other stuff. Okay, now for all 3 of these rules, the terminology is incorrect player. Okay, and as mentioned, for this rule, any late player is sent from the court until the correct time of entry, and possession is awarded to the opposing team where the ball was when play was stopped. Now, a top tip for you umpires: if you're just about to stop the game, just remember where the ball is, okay? Because you will need to remember where it is. Once all of this kerfuffle is dealt with, you're going to then have to set the pass where the ball was when play was stopped. Okay, so a real simple update to a number of rules previously into 3 distinct new rules, which tidy up all of those previous confusions. Now, there's been updates to the rules around players, jewellery and adornments. Now, alongside the rules, as I've said, we have updated our domestic guidance document, which provides additional information outside of the rules. So it's always well worth having a read of that. And you can find that in a link to that in the comments to this video. Now, these changes have been made really to promote inclusivity. Netball and umpiring should be all about what we can do to bring people in the game, not finding a long list of things that stop people from playing the game. So we've got 4 images on the screen. Now, these represent, image 1 represents religious bands. Now, these have been added to aid inclusivity, as I mentioned. Now, many religions have these for many different reasons. They can be be permitted as long as they don't present any significant danger to the wearer or other players. And in the example shown, it's very easy to just put a piece of tape over that just to secure it down so that it doesn't get caught on a finger or anywhere else. Okay, now image 2 represents medical alert bracelets. Now, these are allowed for obvious reasons, but again, like religious bands, they need to be taped and secured so people don't get their fingers caught underneath. Now, image 3, people I'm sure will recognize. This is a Libra sensor, and it's used by diabetic players to monitor their blood sugar. Now, they're also being used for a number of other reasons. However, remember, our job is to use the rules to make play better for players. It's not used to interrogate individuals. So where we see these Libra sensors, you don't need to ask why they're there. All you need to do is just insist that they are covered. And this can be either by a tube bandage or some strapping, but it's so that they don't get knocked off and provide or produce a stick hazard in that sense. So just need to be covered or taped down. Okay, and I mean, it won't all come as a surprise, but I am no expert in hair. But number 14, image 4, sorry, is a ponytail. And regardless of the hair type, the rules now state that hair should be suitably tied back in a ponytail, plait, or braided. And that's regardless of the type of hair. Now, the only other thing I'll mention at this point is that where players are unable to remove things like beading and other adornments that don't naturally occur in the hair, we cannot insist that they are removed. However, within the Afro-Caribbean community, there is an item called a bonnet that can be used, which often can scoop up braided hair into a nice, it's effectively like a hat bag, and keep all of that stuff secure so that the player can still continue to play netball. Now, that's covered in depth within the domestic guidance to give you an idea of what to expect. But if you have people from an Afro-Caribbean background in your club or in your netball environment, just ask them to either explain more to you about what it is, or you may well actually see a player wearing these. Don't be surprised. I have been told to find out that some players wear a shower cap to stop their braids from getting wet. That's absolutely fine as well, as long as it's covered by one of these bonnets. Okay, bet you didn't expect to hear that from me today. Moving on. So within the new rules, the role of the captain has been identified. But before we go on to that, believe it or not, the coin toss process has been identified. So no one ever seemed to remember who has to toss a coin, who has to call it, etc., etc. But it's in the rule book now. So the captain for the first name team tosses the coin, and the other captain calls. Now, if you get up to the dizzy heights where you're being either in an arena match, you may have somebody come in to toss the coin for it, but the same process applies. So the captain for the first name team will toss the coin. If there is a volunteer doing that, they will toss the coin, and then the other captain will still call. Okay, now one of the other changes that's happened is that captains now and any other player concerned may approach the umpire at an interval. Now, ordinarily, we would like this to continue to be the captain, but this means that the captains can come and ask, or their vice captains can come and ask if they're dealing with media interviews about any clarification that's required. Okay. Now, one of the things that you'll see on the screen is on-court captains now must wear identification as outlined by the person or league organising the match. Now, as mentioned, in domestic guidance, we're only insisting that this happens from regional level and above. Now, some examples that you can see on the screen. Within the Super League, we've been using, we're not reinventing the wheel. We've been using coloured Velcro cable tidies that go round the dress strap. Now, other traditional things that people may well have experienced is coloured electrical tape around the upper arm, often used for when there's been a bereavement in a team. They often wear a black armband, although there are a number of colour options available. And then likewise, it's absolutely fine to wear what we would experience as being a traditional captain's armband, just worn on the upper arm. This is particularly good if you're umpiring men's or mixed netball because they don't wear dresses, and if they do wear a vest, the straps are quite big. So a normal captain's armband is absolutely applicable in this setting. Now, within the rules, I hate to say this, but the toss-up has been removed. Now, we will talk a little bit more about that later on. But with the removal of the toss-up, possession has been added to the list of sanctions and actions, as well as the additional rule of simultaneous and mutual infringements. So basically, what you may experience from the previous rule of possession, where two players, opposing players, catch the ball in short succession, that version of the possession rule is still there, but there has been an addition to the rule under simultaneous and mutual infringements. Now, as it says in the second bullet point, umpires now may call taken sparingly where it's necessary to clarify that a player has chosen to play the ball for immediately. Now, at grassroots level, we must continue to insist that umpires are taking the time to set sanctions strongly and ensuring the relevant player is stood out of play. It's all part of effective umpiring, which we'll talk about later on. Now, on occasion, an umpire may blow their whistle to penalise an infringement, and all the conditions are correct. Now, if a player does pass the ball or takes a shot within this time, it may be appropriate to call taken. So that's really a good example. Now, if you are being assessed on a formal umpiring assessment, it's probably advised that you do continue to set strong with contact goalkeeper, penalty pass red, and with an indication arm and a setting arm. Okay. Now, the other thing that we're finding quite hard at Super League level to get ourselves polished up with is that the terminology now also within sanctions and actions for a throw-in has now been changed to out of court. So the example you'll see on the screen is the ball goes out of court, you say out of court red, and the team that you call denotes the one that's just about to take the throw-in. So out of court, England, or out of court, Grasshoppers, whatever. So it will take time to get around that, but eventually we'll iron that all out. Okay. Now, the advantage rule has been restructured, and the key updates relate more to the teaching and assessment of umpires. So if you're an officiating assessor or a tutor, or as an umpire specifically, you should take time to familiarize yourself with the specifics in this area. Okay, but more specifically, principles have been introduced, as mentioned, and guidelines have been given on when it should and should not be applied. So, for instance, advantage really should not be played on game management incidences, which we will talk about later on. Now, there's also an extra piece in the advantage rule of what to do and what to say if a goal is scored. So umpires will no longer call advantage goal if an infringement is penalised and the goal is scored fractionally afterwards. Okay, so this should now be replaced with a whistle for the infringement, the goal scored hand signal, and then a call of advantage, and then the infringement and the player who infringed. So the example I'll give you is whistle, advantage contact goalkeeper. You don't have to do the contact hand signal, but it's advantage contact goalkeeper, and you put your hand up to indicate the goal has been scored. Another example may well be advantage obstruction goal defense and the goal scored. Okay. Now, if the whistle has been blown, the full terminology has been delivered and the goal has then been scored, advantage infringement and playing position is not required to be repeated. Okay, so this application only occurs if the whistle has been blown and the shot is scored before the umpire has started or is in the early stages of the start of their delivery. Okay, their terminology delivery. So a few tidy ups in that area as well. Now, the next three slides talk about the centre pass, okay? Both the centre pass errors and check-in infringements, and then what to do with a few tweaks of the actual taking of the centre pass. Now, the centre pass rule has now been updated to minimise the chance that an error can occur. So umpires are now required to call the centre pass whilst also indicating the direction of play. So after the goal scored, you would say red centre and you'd indicate. Now that gives a prompt to your co-umpire to watch. And they will often, or they will be required to be indicating the same way back to you. So at that point, if you're different, as I always say, hold time to save time. That's when you guys will be able to ask each other just to check the centre pass with the scorers. Now, in grassroots netball, a reserve umpire is not often present. Therefore, this change may be redundant. But in regional level netball and above, the reserve umpire will also be required to indicate the centre pass. So if you're the umpire that's ordinarily given the goal, you might not be able to see the reserve umpire if you've got any doubt in there. So if your co-umpire can look across to your reserve umpire, you should all be able to triangulate. So those are things that the umpires can do to ensure that a centre pass error does not occur. Now, the other addition to this rule is that now players may appeal to the umpire to check the validity of the centre pass between the scoring of a goal and before the next centre pass is taken. Now, previously in the domestic guidance, there were a whole load of sets of guidance that basically allowed the centre pass to be retaken if the ball hadn't got to a certain point. Now, those have all been removed in lieu of the number of additional checks that now occur in this rule. However, if the player is unsure that the centre pass is correct, they can ask the umpire to check. Now, players, this is an appeal to you guys. Do it in a cordial manner, okay? So in a non-confrontational manner. Just ask the umpire, whole time umpire, can we have a pass check, please? Okay. Now, once the centre pass is taken, if there is an error, then it cannot be repaired, basically. So the centre pass continues. And yes, you don't switch the odds and evens and you don't, kind of switch things over. It just means that an error's occurred and the next centre pass will be taken by the same team, basically. Okay. But all of these strategies basically are in place to ensure the continued validity and correct sequencing of the centre pass. Okay. Now, with regards to this part of the centre pass rule, this relates to the infringements that can occur and deals with some crafty tactics that meant that teams were deliberately infringing so that the non-infringing team would lose their centre pass going into the next quarter. So this slide really refers to the updates to the centre pass rule, but relate to centre passes being taken at the end of play, but where an infringement may occur, which is likely to affect who is entitled to take the next centre pass. Okay, so if we look on the screen at centre pass before the whistle is blown to end a period of play, the centre pass will not be ruled to be have been taken if, so that means basically the team with the ball get the next centre pass in the next quarter. So it won't be ruled to have been taken if the ball is still in the centre's hands and no player from their team has been penalised. Okay. If the ball is knocked out of the centre's hand by an opponent, okay, so if they've got it and it's being knocked out of their hands, and any infringement by the opposing team that has been penalised and that the sanction has not been taken. So again, a tip to the non-infringing team, if you know that time is clicking down and you're not going to be in trouble for delaying play, then just take your time to set the sanction, okay? Because if it's not taken, you'll get the ball back in the next quarter. And then the last one in this area is that the non-infringing team will start the next quarter if all of those conditions are met. Okay, so some pretty simple tidy ups of that rule there. Now, the last part of the updates to controlling the centre pass always cause some scratching of heads and why and all of this sort of stuff. But Rule 8.14 talks about basically everyone needs to be behind the line if they're not a centre. They can jump from that area and land in the centre third and catch the ball. Okay, that's how a centre pass has been taken. We all know that. But these updates to the rule talk about the updates to what happens if you don't get that bit right. Now, the position of the sanction for all of the following examples is in the goal third, near to the transverse line. So where the player jumped from is in that goal third, near to the transverse line, in line with where the infringement occurred. Okay, so a player from the team taking the center pass may not touch or catch the ball in the air and then land with both feet astride the transverse line. And that also includes if their foot is across the line. So their toes are in centre third and their heels in goal third. Okay. If they touch or catch the ball in the air, then land either wholly or partly outside of the court. Okay, so this is the one that gets people scratching their heads. So if you're quite close to the sideline and you're in goal third and you jump and you catch the ball and you land with your left foot out of court and your right foot in the court, because you have broken the centre pass rule first, the sanction is set in goal third, just slightly on court, okay? Not as a throw-in, okay? Because the controlling the centre pass rule has been broken, not the out of court and throw-in rule. Okay. Now, what I will say here that statement that I've just made often leads again to people scratching their heads. This does not mean that a centre taking the centre pass, who steps into the centre and passes the ball, that goes off court on the sidelines, bounding the centre third, so not across the transverse line, it goes out from the sides untouched, that also still results in a throw-in, not the sanction being taken in the goal third. And that again goes back to the thought process that the first rule infringes the centre pass rule, not the controlling the centre pass rule. And that's why you have a throw-in instead of that. But this well worth reading page 36 and 37 just to get your head around that. It will be unlikely to actually happen very often, but as we always say, if you don't expect the unexpected when it does happen, you might not remember that that's where the sanction's taken. Okay. Now, one of the big tidy ups, as I mentioned, is on definitions. So the shot has actually been defined in there. So a shot is a goal shooter or goal attack who throws, bats, or deflects the ball towards the ring in an attempt to score without the ball first touching the ground. Okay, now in the previous rules, it was assumed that any deflection from either a goal shooter or goalkeeper who stood in the goal circle, which then went through the ring, was awarded as a goal. Now, in this rule book, only deflections from shots are successful in being counted. So, for instance, a pass from a player outside of the goal circle that's deflected through the ring will not result in a goal and play will continue. So it's only if a shooter or goal attack shoots the ball and it's deflected from a player inside that the goal will be scored. Okay, and we have had some of this happen. So again, your centre might pass the ball to another player on the other side of the circle and the defender deflects it and it goes through the ring. If that happens, it's not a shot, therefore play will continue. Okay, now, one of the big changes that you would have seen is the change to the scoring a goal rule. Now, if the ball passes completely through the ring on any other occasion, okay, the goal is scored and play continues. Okay, so that just covers it off. But at the end of play, if the whistle to end the period of play or to hold time is blown, after the ball has left the hands of the goal shooter or goal attack and the shot is successful, the goal will be scored. Okay, so if you imagine this, you're just about to shoot and the ball's just left your hands and it's in flight and the umpire either blows for an injury or blows for the end of the quarter. If the ball is in flight and clear from the hands of the shooter and the shot is successful, the shot will now count as a goal. Okay, so that is quite a significant change. Now, the only other consideration within that is if in the flight of the ball, a player causes the goal post to move. So a defending player may cause the goal post to move at all, whether or not it causes the goal to miss, Or if you've got a really tall player, or this is really apparent in men's netball, if the ball is interfered with once it's on its downward path to the ring, if a really bouncy and tall defender tips the ball there, then the subsequent shot is retaken, and any shot after that, again, that's interfered with in the same way will be reset. Okay, so that is if the ball's on its way and the post is knocked or a defender interferes with the ball on its downward path, that's the only time when the penalty pass will be reset. Okay, so I mean, this is one of those things that will happen once in a blue moon. However, as long as you've got it in the back of your mind, when it does happen and you think ball's in flight, whistle goes, goal scored, ball in hands, whistle goes, that's the end of the period of play. Okay. Now, one of the really exciting changes, and this is one of the ones that's been introduced to speed up the game, is players have now are now able to request a tactical change to prevent the unethical use of injury time. Okay, so in plain terms, this now means that on-court players no longer have to feign an injury to be substituted. So, oh no, what's wrong? Oh, my finger. Okay, now due to their planned nature, tactical changes do happen very quickly, and teams should be encouraged to make their changes without delay. Okay, now this is not a rolling sub. Okay, so there's no provision for rolling subs in this game, and if there are any situations where rolling subs are used, it is not being played, netball's not being played to the 2024 rules update, and therefore that it's not an approved and authorized version of the game. Therefore, any membership or insurance is invalid on that format of the game. And additionally, we're not able to assess umpires on anything that's not covered outside of Rule 21, which is variations to the rules. Okay. Now, both teams can make tactical changes, but they can only occur after a goal's been scored. Okay, so they can only occur after a goal's been scored. Now, there are two types of tactical change. Okay, now a tactical change is a change between two or more playing positions on court. Now, these are the hard ones because it does feel a bit awkward because it's a bit like the goal shooter and the goal attack will change position and nobody will leave the court. Okay, now it could be everybody on the team could change positions, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Now, there's also a tactical substitution, and this is what we would expect more traditionally from an injury substitution previously. Now, this is a change between one or more players on court where one or more players leave the court and enter on. Okay, and as mentioned, these are more straightforward as a player will leave the court and be replaced by a substitute. Okay, now, umpires should allow slight additional changes if the captain's being replaced. Why? I ask you here, because they'll need to have that either their armband or their tape or that little tag swapped over. Okay. Now, the one thing to look out for is that within a game, there could be a combination of both of these tactical changes, both a tactical change and a tactical substitution. So you might have, as I said, the on-court player calling for a tactical timeout. You blow the whistle, hold time, tactical change, and the goal attack and goal shooter may switch, but then you may also at the same time have the wing defense leave to be replaced by a new wing defense. Okay, so it's just an idea to have a look at that and get that in your mind. Now, the one thing to talk about with regards to tactical changes is if you are in a central venue and you have central timing, tactical changes can still be used, and umpires, you will need to still follow the procedure. So hold time, tactical change, in the knowledge that the clock will still be ticking. Now, I'll talk about this now on this next slide, but umpires should always ask what for, because there are different procedures in place if a player comes back to you and says tactical change, or they ask you for an injury. So you have separate rules for injury stoppages, and you also have separate processes for a tactical change. Okay, but my point is, with a tactical change, what you need to ensure is that you are always clear with when it's going to happen. Because if you are in a central venue and the clock is ticking down, we are suggesting that any tactical changes requested in the last 30 seconds of the game can be declined. Okay, now the rule does say that if a team uses tactical changes frivolously, which means lots unnecessary, that the umpire can actually decline. And also, if the umpire deems that the tactical change is being used in a negative way, so it's being used to try and delay play, then the umpires can view it as a delaying of play and can advance a sanction accordingly. Okay, so it is really, really useful. The tactical change has been a really, really good addition to the game and speeds up a lot of things. Now, one of the top tips I can give you is that what we are suggesting to players is that they use the hand signal. So when they say umpire time, what for, tactical, that's a real visual. But what we're also suggesting to players is that if the umpire is currently just about to score the goal, it's a lot easier to ask the non-controlling umpire, because either umpire can hold time immediately after the goal's been scored. And it just means everything's been dealt with a lot more smoothly. Okay. Now, within the stoppages rule, we've just talked about tactical timeouts, but injuries do still occur in netball, and blood injuries are also apparent in our sport as well. Now, the rules around blood have been updated in line with the World Netball Medical Commission, and they now mirror that of other sports. Now, the primary risk in netball, particularly when playing inside, is related to blood being a slip hazard on the court. Now, this does remain a priority for umpires to manage, as is the presence of blood on the ball. However, it's now okay for players to have a small amount of dry blood on their uniform without the need for these to be changed. Okay, so if, for instance, someone might have had blood cut on their hand, and they've wiped it on their dress. Ordinarily, that presence of that blood would mean their dress has to be clean. But if it's not blood stained, and this is when an amount of wet blood leaves a notable mark on material and is exchangeable, or there's blood dripping on the floor, it does not need to, the dress does not need to be changed. It only needs to be changed if there is wet blood on there. Okay. Now, with regards to bleeding players needs to be substituted and have their wounds covered and any blood-stained clothing cleaned if it's still wet. Okay. Now, as it says on the screen, any dry blood on a uniform now is not required to be cleaned, and the uniform doesn't need to be changed. Okay, so it just brings the blood rule in line with everything else within the sporting sphere. Now, playing the ball, this is a really, really important one for you to actually go and have a look at the World Netball video, because nothing I can say here can actually explain it in as well a way that the World Netball video does. So this rule has now been rewritten, and it includes a load of things on how you can gain possession, a number of guidelines on what you can do while you're in possession, which includes repossession, and then all of the other aspects of what you can do without having possession of the ball, including the replayed ball. Now, within that rule, there's also a long list of prohibited actions. Okay, so those are well worth having a look at what you can and cannot do with the ball. Now, as you'll see on the screen, the hand signals have also been streamlined to indicate this. So hand signal 14, which is on the left, this is used for instances of repossession, and it looks like this. Now, repossession is where a player has caught the ball, lost possession, and then have either caught the ball again, so catch, drop, catch, or before it's been touched by another player, they touch it again. Okay, so that's incorrect playing the ball, repossession. Okay, so you would say repossession red, free pass blue. Okay, now for all other instances of incorrect playing the ball, you use hand signal 15, which is on the right, and that is a bouncing action. Okay, now this is actually used for replayed ball, it's used for playing the ball on the ground, and it's also used for using the goalpost. So no more of this using the goalpost hand signal. If a player has used a goalpost as a support, you say incorrect playing the ball and use that hand signal. Okay, now as I said, please watch the World Netball video because it shows you some really good practical examples. Now, one of the common myths with this rule is actually the actual substance of fabric of the rule actually hasn't changed that much at all. If anything, it's just made it more streamlined and more easy to understand. Okay. Short pass. Okay, short pass. The wording of the 2020 short pass rule stated that there should be sufficient space for an opposing player to intercept the ball with a hand. Okay, now this actually rendered the rule almost redundant. Therefore, the following update has been provided in the first bullet point shown. So, when a player passes the ball, there must be sufficient space for an on-court for an opposing player to be able to deflect or intercept the ball as it moves from the hands of the passer to those of the receiver. Now, the most straightforward indication for umpires for when considering if an infringement has occurred for short pass is at the point of exchange of the passer and receiver that there are four hands on the ball at once. That's the starting point. So if I hand the ball to you and at the same point I give you the ball, my hands and your hands are on the ball, then that's the starting point on the continuum of a short pass. Now, after that, what you've got to think of is there should be a distance and subsequent opportunity for a player to be able to get in to intercept the ball. And that doesn't mean to be caught. It could be tipped or knocked out in that aspect. Now, if two players from the same team gain possession of the ball in quick succession, the player who gained possession of the ball first must remain in possession, and the hands of the player who gained the possession of the ball second must be removed. So if you and I, watching this video, I caught and you caught slightly afterwards, if you take the ball out of my hands, that's another example of a short pass, okay? So if I catch it first and you put your hands on it, then I must retain there. Now, people will always say, well, what about the ball off the post? Now, the same example applies about there being an opportunity and distance, sufficient distance for a player to get in to either intercept or tip the ball. Now, in the example I gave with four hands, if a player literally throws the ball and there's a tiny distance and they've almost got the ball and they've touched the post at the same time, then it's likely that that will be a short pass. So a pass that has got adequate opportunity for a tip or an intercept to occur. I can't give you an exact distance, but you will see the opportunity being there. If there is no opportunity, then it's likely to be deemed as a short pass. Now, as mentioned with replaying, there's a really, really handy video by World Netball on this, which shows you exactly what I've just explained. Okay. Now, the other thing just to add on this is unlike every single other rule in this 2024 rules update, this rule is set for review after 12 months because when they were rewriting the rules, World Netball still were unsure. There was a few wranglings on this rule and they were still unsure when the rulebook went to print. So this rule will be reviewed over time. But what I will say is in the Super League, it actually has been umpired quite well. So it seems okay for now, but we will be looking to get feedback at the end of this year's cycle. Changes to the offside rule. This is what I'm calling the common sense rule. So you've heard it here first. There has been very minor updates to the offside rule. However, the most significant change is that a player may now go offside into an offside area to retrieve the ball to speed up the taking of that sanction. Okay, so a player who goes into an offside area to retrieve the ball, who then subsequently passes it to another player to take the sanction, would ordinarily be penalised for offside. So you can only go either into the other goal third or into the goal circle if you are taking the sanction and it is deemed to be speeding up play. Now, the only other minor update to this rule has only served to reinforce the age-old umpiring term of on the line is fine, but not a throw-in. Now, the rules clearly state that a player is not offside if any part of their body is in contact with, but not over, the line bounding court areas. So if you're a centre court player and you can't go in the goal circle, your foot on the line is fine, but over, you're offside. So it's a very minor tidy up, but the headline in this rule is the common sense rule, basically. Now, out of court, player outside of the court. Now, a player is not outside and not out of court. Like I said in the previous rule, on the line is fine if their body is on, but not over any of the lines or the sidelines, the goal line of the sidelines. So that's another tidy up in there. Now, a player may jump from a position inside the court and pass or shoot before landing outside of the court. This happens a lot in men's and mixed netball. They will surprise you how far male players can jump out of court and scoop a ball back in, and you're just about to blow the whistle, and it's as if they've flown. So again, this is just about making sure that a player has touched or landed outside of the court before they, whilst in possession of the ball. Now, a player having no contact with the ball, whether attacking or defending, may move into the court surround, providing this is solely for the purpose of repositioning back onto the court. Now, this kind of means that both players can reposition in the court surround. Now, previously, this rule has been clarified because effectively, if you were taking a goal line throw in and the umpire was umpiring that goal line throw in, a player up the other end could actually go off court, but you would be expected to penalise them for not being on court when the pass was taken. So that just tidies up that rule that actually people can be positioned in the court surround, and the player taking the throw in does not have to wait. Now that does bring me nicely on to the last bullet point. A player who leaves the field of play without the permission of the umpire will be treated as a late player. So this links back to that previous role. So if they just wander off, they have to be held off of court until the next break in play. Okay, so that's just to tidy up in that rule. Now, obstruction. Okay, now minor updates to the obstruction rule have been provided to give additional clarity on specific scenarios regarding obstruction. Now, additional information has been given on judging the obstruction distance when players are lifted. Now, this actually talks about you see it in more in elite netball in Australia than you do anywhere else, but a player being lifted to jump to intercept a shot. Now, both the lifted player and the teammate lifting must observe the obstruction rule and must be positioned at least 3 feet away from the opponent. Okay, now the umpire must always consider what happens next, basically. So if you've lifted a player, they've got to come down. So do they come down within 0.9 of a meter or 3 feet of their opponent? Do they actually bump into them and land on them? Okay, so when considering that obstruction rule, it's often what happens next that's the most important part of that rule. Now, the second bullet point on the screen talks about the requirement for a defending player to adjust their distance if an opponent pivots towards them. So I'm going to try and demonstrate this on the screen. So if my fingertips are at the toes and I land and I pivot and the defender takes up the defending distance, but then I pivot towards them, thus lessening the distance. I'm not footworking. I've just pivoted here and I've then pivoted towards the defending player has to then increase their distance. Okay, so it's just a tidy up. It was what was being umpired previously, but the rules were a little bit silent in this area. So if you're more, I wouldn't say old-fashioned, but more of a traditional defender that takes up your 3 feet quickly, if the player legitimately pivots towards you, you then have to increase your distance to make sure that you continue to be 3 feet away from your opponent. Now, this wonderful picture on the right actually denotes the addition of prevent from obstruction of a player without the ball. Now, often it was found that players were being penalised unnecessarily for obstruction of a player not in possession of the ball, where their arms had been away from their body. So really, in theory, when umpires spotted their arms being away from the body, that was the snap that broke the rule. But actually, in the new rules, the rules are very clear on now is that arms can be momentarily away, like the old rules, but they have to be out and prevent. Okay, they have to prevent that player. So rather than seeing the arms, you need to see the arms and what they're then doing. If they're preventing the opponent from getting into a legitimate position, that's when you are going to penalise. Now, one of the other misconceptions in this rule as well is that this type of obstruction is often mistaken for contact and vice versa, because actually if a player is cutting to go into a space and you put your arm out and hit into them, then that's very likely to lead to contact if it interferes. Okay, so a few tidy ups in there, but ultimately the arms away must prevent an opponent from getting into a better position or prevent them from moving. Okay, but if it hits them, it's likely to be a contact infringement. Okay. Now, this is a good point to actually say that we're going to talk about contact and game management now, but there is an in-depth session on contact and game management, which is about an hour long. Now, this is quite a short update session, which only covers the brief updates in this area of the rulebook. However, if you want to spend some time finding about some in-depth updates, the links are in the chat to take you to the general release contact and game management section. Okay, but if we just switch back to this presentation, in the following sections, we'll talk about the updates to contact. And basically, the contact rule has been updated to clarify correct interpretation. Okay, so the contact rule, really, it was felt that contact was not being umpired consistently and penalised consistently across the world, and that umpires and coaches and players were not on the same page. And it was also felt that excess whistle in the game where infringements were penalised, where no interference was occurring, detracted the game's appeal to spectators, and it also disrupted the momentum of teams playing. There are also concerns that umpires were not acting when player safety was compromised and that dangerous play was also not being taken seriously enough. So now, interference is clearly outlines scenarios where an umpire should act with all other incidental contact between opposing players deemed as fair contest. So what this basically means is any bumps or brushes that may well have occurred previously are now not really enough to tip the scales in contact. Now, one of the top tips I can give you when you're thinking about whether or not interference occurs, or whether physical touch or a physical contact between opposing players does actually interfere, is there a loss of possession? So often, if there has been a loss of possession, that contact was enough to tip the interference button. On the converse to that, if a player is bumped and they still have possession of the ball, then they may well not have been enough contact for it actually to be interference. Therefore, there's no need to play advantage contact or there's no need to blow it, okay? Because there's not been enough interference for the trigger to be tipped, so to speak. So now, as we say, to be penalised as contact, the physical contact must result in a loss of possession or interference with the passing or shooting action of an opponent. So they might be just about to shoot and there's a contact on the hand which affects the shot from being successful, or a change or changes in the body position of an opponent, regardless of whether or not this makes whether or not the opponent in possession limits their ability to move freely or suffers an unfair disadvantage in attacking, defending, or playing the ball. So basically, what that means is it needs to be obvious. Okay, so there needs to be a change in body position, or a player needs to be moved out of the spot. Okay, so as I said right at the beginning, this should now mean that contact is more obvious and any minor brushes or bumps or minor touches on the ball are not deemed sufficient enough to trigger that whistle on contact. So this whole idea of something being a soft contact is gone. It's an error, and on an officiating assessment, if you do penalise something that does not interfere, you are very likely to be marked down as a result. Okay, now, as mentioned, there are a few additional updates to the contact rule, which we talk in more depth, both in game management next, but also in the game management and contact session, bolt-on session that you can have a look at in the chat. But these result in changes to causing contact of a player in the air, causing contact of a moving player. So if you put the brakes on deliberately and they bump into you, that's actually on you, not the player that bumped into you. Inevitable contact, which is the sandwiching of an opponent by two opposing players so that they can't move without contacting. And then the contact endangering player safety. So often in this rule book, contact and game management, particularly those last four that we've talked about, or last three minus inevitable contact, are read in conjunction or alongside each other. Okay. Now, Moving on to game management. Like with the contact rule, the game management rule has been updated to simplify application and to encourage use. So previously, there are a lot of game management actions that were being thrown around by umpires, but players weren't changing their behavior. But there was no escalation, so it wouldn't be escalated to the next level. Okay, now the game management rules currently place and always have placed the responsibility for changing behavior on the player. Okay, now this is following good umpiring and good instructions from umpires. Okay, but ultimately it's the player's responsibility to change their behavior at the instruction of the umpire, thus, and also supported by their coach and their teammates. Okay. Other changes to the game management rules are in there to keep players safe, to address the high number of penalties, so number of infringements, but there didn't seem to be any change in behavior or any escalation, so that's clearly outlined in there. But there's also been some greater consequences for those playing outside of the rules as well. Now, there are two really, really useful game management videos from World Netball, and you can find them on our rules and updates page, but they are well worth having a look, as is our own contact and game management additional bolt-on session, which you can find in the comments of this video. Now, one of the big changes, as I said, to address this number of infringing and umpires giving out game management without following it through, is that cautions have been removed in favour of proactive advice. Okay. Now, what I will say is this does not mean that we jump straight to proactive advice without using our effective umpiring techniques. And the other video talks in a lot of depth about these, but remembering that, strong and clear hand signals really set the tone for players, as does changing the tone of your whistle a bit louder, a bit longer to gain a player's attention, reshuffling your terminology, goalkeeper, contact, tactical pause, goalkeeper, what? Contact, So all of those effective umpiring techniques are still there, but it's felt that if you need a more direct approach, so effectively, if you have felt that you've umpired that player enough, or they may well do it in one-off examples, you may well feel that proactive advice is useful to change the player's behavior. Now, proactive advice is not useful if you are having game management issues. So you will not use proactive advice on game management issues. I'll talk a bit more about that and what you'll do a bit later. But if you feel that there's low-level incidences and there's a whole load of examples coming up that you need to be short and sharp, and it's a corrective statement that shows your intent that that specific behavior needs to change. So for instance, for a player that keeps going into the goal circle offside, wing defense, stop going into the goal circle. Okay. And once you've delivered that proactive advice, any other foul play or anything else that's untowards within the game needs to then be escalated. And I'll talk about where in a moment. Other examples are for a goalkeeper that might be consistently positioned too close, defending too close. Goalkeeper, increase your defending distance. So it may well be obstruction goalkeeper, you need to increase your defending distance. Okay. For a kind of specific type of contact, so might be holding their arm, often in a position they think you can't see. But contact goal defense, you need to stop holding your opponent's arm. Or another example I'll give you is for a breaking at a centre pass. Breaking wing attack, you need to wait for the whistle at a centre pass. Okay. Now, the one thing about proactive advice is it's deemed binding, which means if you give proactive advice to a player, remember it's the person, not their playing position, it's been deemed to be given by both of you. Therefore, at quarter time, you must have a conversation with your co-umpire to check if they've given proactive advice. Now, because it's binding, I cannot emphasize enough that you need to exhaust your effective umpiring techniques before you escalate on that part of the game management ladder. Okay, but proactive advice is a short and sharp corrective statement that basically makes the player aware that that's it for that specific behavior and then any other foul play. Okay. Now, in the 2020 rules of netball, the advancement of a sanction was limited to the instances of delaying play. But in the 2024 rules book, this game management action is possible to be used in addition to a penalty pass being awarded. Okay, so that's for any infringement. Now, there's still clear delaying play. That still exists. So if a player holds the ball or throws it away. However, umpires may now advance a sanction up to half a third. Okay, now this may be to inside the goal circle if the ball was in the goal third. Unfortunately, there is nothing you can do if a player decides to delay play and their opponent is stood just inside centre third and there's probably 5 seconds left in the game. There is no way that you could advance that ball to getting into the goal, into the goal circle for a potential shot to be taken. Okay. Now, other tips on advancing a sanction is that the infringing player is required to stand out. So come with the sanction and stand out of play at the new position or at the edge of the area if this is an offside position. Okay. Now, the other thing that I will say in this is that if you have to advance from your area of control, so it might be very close to the center circle, into your co-umpire's area of control, that you are responsible for taking that sanction and the offending player and positioning them in your co-umpire's area of control. The minute that that sanction is set, the controlling umpire picks up that sanction and becomes the controlling umpire. So unlike the centre pass, where you're involved in taking the centre pass and any infringements that occur on a centre pass, you would position an advanced sanction in your co-umpire's area of control. You drop that off and then they would penalise any contacts or anything else like that on that new position. Okay, so that's advancing a sanction up to half a third. Now, one of the questions that we are always asked is what happens if it's a goalkeeper and they are advanced for repeated infringing, for instance. So they have to have a sanction advance, but they're under the goalpost. Okay, so there's no way that they can be advanced. Now, what you would say in that instance is goalkeeper, that's repeated infringement, and I would have advanced the sanction, however, there's no space. So consider this an escalation. Okay, because after you have advanced, you then have to escalate on the game management ladder. And the sanction after an advance is a warning. So for any other foul play after an advance, you are then likely to issue a warning. Okay. Now, this rule does say advance and or escalate a sanction. Now, what we have found in Super League is that we don't tend to use the escalation of a sanction very often. So I'm not sure it will be apparent in grassroots netball, but we always say never. So what I will say in this is used for instances where a free pass, so all of our minor infringements, particularly for offside, a free pass might not be appropriate for somebody that keeps going in the goal circle. You might not be to the point where you want to advance. It might not have enough impact on play to advance, but you can then say to the player, that's offside or breaking at a centre pass, that's offside wing defence. It's an escalation. It's now a penalty pass. Okay, now if you do that as well, the next step after an escalation, like with an advance, is then a warning. Okay, but if you do that, you must be very clear with that player that that is what it is. So if you are escalating, you must be very clear and explain to them that this is an escalation, therefore it's a penalty pass, not a free pass. Now, the last bullet point on the last couple of bullet points, sorry, is that you may also decide to escalate in you turn a free pass into a penalty pass, but then you also may do it in combination and add to an advance. Now, something like this, an example for this would be an intentional offside on the circle edge that stops the pass from going into the goal shooter who stood nicely under the post. Now, you would have to turn it into a penalty pass. So you're escalating a free pass into a penalty pass, and then that penalty pass is then positioned under the goalpost. Now, if it was a player that's from outside of the circle, they would stand out of play on the circle edge and the sanction would be taken under the goalpost. Okay, so just a couple of examples there. Now, as the last bullet point says on the screen, advancing and or escalating a sanction would not usually be appropriate for infringement in danger player safety. Okay, so for big things where players are likely to be warned or ordered off, you probably wouldn't need to advance or escalate because the sanction awarded would be a lot higher. Okay. Now, some other game management updates. A player can only receive one advance, one warning, and one suspension. Okay. Now, in the warning now is the only time when you would inform that player of what will happen next. So, whole time, that's repeated infringing goalkeeper, and that's a warning. Any further instances of foul play, and you will be suspended. You don't then need to regurgitate that for for a suspension. Okay. Now, it clearly outlines that a player must be suspended if they engage in dangerous or highly reckless behavior that endangers player safety or that is sufficiently serious to warrant an immediate ordering off. So things like causing a player in the air to fall, who hits their head on the post and is really badly injured, that may lead to a straight ordering off. Okay. Behavior that continues after a warning is issued may well result in a warning. Okay, may well result in a suspension. Now, one of the other additions to this part of the game management rule now is because game management has been elevated, there is a chance that there will be more suspensions and there will be more orderings off. So for a player that is ordered off, after a period of 4 minutes, they can be replaced by a different player on their team. That ordered off player will report to their team bench and take no further part. But after a period of 4 minutes, they can be replaced by another player from their team. Okay, but they have to serve an order off period of 4 minutes. Now, for suspended player, that remains at 2 minutes, but a change to the suspension rule means that the suspended player does not have to return to court to then be substituted. They can actually, after the suspension period has elapsed, they can return straight to their team bench. Now, if that happens, what we are suggesting players and coaches is that the replacement player or the substitute player stands by the suspension chair with about 15 to 10 seconds to go so that the umpire knows that they're ready to come on. If you've got a reserve umpire, they can take care of that. But the chances are in grassroots netball, you're not going to have a reserve. But a suspended player can be subbed straight off. Their replacement then waits by the suspension chair, and the umpire will then get that new player on at the next break in play. Okay, they don't have to wait for a goal. It's just that's one of them, but they can wait for a penalty pass or a throw in or a break in play. Okay, so one of the last bits to be added into the other game management updates is in the event that team officials and or bench players do not respond to a warning, so you can warn a bench player or the coach, the umpire can request that they're removed from the playing enclosure for the remainder of the match. Okay, so you can request that they go in. And now that may be at grassroots level outside of the fence or outside of the sports hall or in a bigger environment. It may well mean in an arena that they have to go to the changing rooms or into the stand or somewhere else. But the bottom line is they have to be removed from the team bench, whatever that is, and they cannot continue to coach that team. Or if they're a bench player, they cannot be listed in that squad list. Okay, so they have to be removed. Now, as mentioned right at the very beginning, the toss-up has been removed. Oh dear, what are we going to do? But it's been replaced by simultaneous and mutual infringements. Okay, so in reality, toss-ups didn't really happen much in anymore, and because they didn't happen very often, they took up 3 pages in the rule book. But when they did happen, people couldn't remember what to do. So all references to the toss-up have been removed, and in all instances where a toss-up would have previously been awarded, these have been replaced with possession being awarded to the team currently in possession of the ball, or if the ball's loose, it will go back to the team who last had possession. Okay. Now, if you can't remember who had last had possession, then you consult with your co-umpire, and they may well know who had it, and then you just pop a hold time in, hold time to save time, check with your co-umpire, and then return the ball back to the team that had possession last. Okay. Now, a simultaneous infringement is when two players commit the same infringement at exactly the same time. Okay. Now, mutual infringements are any occurrence during a match when the umpire is unable to determine which team infringed or where the ball was when play was stopped. Now, within mutual infringements, if both umpires simultaneously blow their whistle to penalise opposing teams for infringements, the infringement with a more significant sanction or action will stand according to the following order. So if we both blow an infringement, if I blow a foul play and you blow something else, my foul play counts. If I blow a major infringement and you blow a minor infringement, my major infringement counts. Or if I blow a minor infringement or an infringement resulting in an action being taken. So if mine's a minor, like footwork or offside or playing the ball, and yours is an action, so like, I don't know, like a throw in being taken or a possession being given, then it goes back to the higher level of sanction. Now, if the infringement have the same action or sanction, then the decision made by the controlling umpire, which means the umpire whose area the ball is in, that's where that umpire's decision will stand. Now, I'm just going to whiz back to simultaneous and mutual and just give you some examples of where you would have a simultaneous infringement. So at a centre pass, if two opposing players gain possession of the ball simultaneously with one or both hands, okay, so if they break, one of them gets the ball or both of them get the ball, you would blow your whistle, you would say simultaneous breaking, red, goal defence, blue, goal attack, possession, red, because it's a red centre pass. Okay. Another example would be where two opposing players send the ball out of court. Okay. So me on the red team, I'm past the ball to my red team player, but the ball's put out by a red team player and a blue team player. Simultaneously, I would blow the whistle and award possession to the red team because I was the one that passed the ball just before that infringement occurred. Another example is a centre pass. Again, two opposing players enter the centre third before the whistle goes, and both touch or catch the ball. Again, because it's let's say a blue centre pass this time, blue goal defence and red wing attack go offside together, then you would blow your whistle, simultaneous offside or breaking, a free pass to the blue, or not free pass, you would award possession to the blue team. Okay. The other one, which is really obvious, is two players running from two different directions that contact each other. Neither's at fault, but Bosch comes onto the ground. That would go back to the team who last had possession of the ball. So likely where the ball was just passed, and Bosch, it would go back to the blue team if they were the ones that passed the ball last. Okay. So hand signals. This is the last part of this update. So just to give you a quick update on the hand signals, we talked about repossession and replaying the ball, which are over the far right. Tactical change always comes with a hold time, even if you're in a central venue. Hold time, if you're in a central venue that's centrally timed, the clock will still tick down, but you still need to follow procedure. Hold time, tactical change, red. Okay, interference with a shot and intimidation are both the same hand signal. Incorrect position or breaking and incorrect use of core areas is the old over a third hand signal. They're all clumped together. And then there's a possession call. Now, what I will say about the possession call is if it's a possession call where I catch the ball fractionally before you put your hands on it as an opponent, the umpire will not blow their whistle for that. And they will say, possession, Gary's team. Okay, red team. So there's no whistle on that type of possession call. Okay, so that is the main updates to the 2024 rules in a very potted and quick fashion. As I've already said, In the comments to this video, there is a link to the longer contact and game management session, which if you are an umpire is very well worth watching. But actually, it is useful for coaches and players as well, but that goes into a lot more depth in those areas in particular. Now, as a reminder, you can submit questions in the link that's in the comments of this video, or I'll show some QR codes on the screen next, which you can press pause and scan with your mobile device. But basically, you can submit questions and read the answers that are already in there. And there are probably about 60 or 70 answers already. And they're normally, there's only so many ways you can peel an apple, isn't there? So basically there are a lot of questions that you may well find the answers to before you even need to submit. So they're well worth having a read. Now, I would just put this on the screen and say if you scan it with a device, or if you go onto the rules and updates page on the England Netball website, you can find them there as well. But the QR code on the left will take you to the process to submit rules. And also, if you scan the QR code on the right-hand side, this is where you'll be able to view the responses. Okay. So if you need to press pause now, by all means do so. And that basically concludes this 2024 Rules of Netball update. Okay. I will just reiterate that this rules update needs to be read in conjunction with the rule book and also any domestic guidance from England Netball that's found in the domestic guidance document as well, particularly surrounding the variations to the rules in Rule 21. That gives you a clear outline of which rules can be varied. All other rules cannot be varied because it will invalidate your insurance and your England Netball membership as an approved and authorised netball provider. So it's well worth making sure that you have a read of the rulebook, have a look at this presentation, and also have a look at the England Netball domestic guidance document. I wish you all the very best of luck for the new season ahead. I was quite nervous about the new rules, but effectively I've only umpired 19 games under the new rules, and a lot of the changes are very, very quick to get to grips with. And as always, if you need any help or advice, contact your county officiating lead or your regional officiating lead. They're your local experts and they do a fantastic job. Or if you can't get hold of them, or if you want to make us do earn our money, by all means, get in contact with us at officiating@englandnetball.co.uk and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks ever so much.